What happens when a 16-year-old girl flying first class for the very first time is told she doesn't belong. A senior flight attendant, fueled by a bitter prejudice, looks at the young black girl in seat 2A and sees an easy target. She demands the girl move to the back of the plane, humiliating her in front of a full cabin. But she makes one critical, career-ending mistake. She has no idea that the calm, authoritative voice that will soon echo from the cockpit belongs to the girl's mother, the captain of the aircraft. This isn't just a story about a conflict at 30,000 feet. It's about a reckoning that sent shockwaves through an entire airline. The air in the Apex Air first-class lounge at JFK International Airport hummed with a quiet, expensive energy. 16-year-old Imani, adjusting the strap of her leather satchel, felt like an imposter. The space was all muted grays, polished chrome, and the hushed clinking of ceramic on glass. Men in tailored suits spoke in low, confident tones on their phones, while women with $1,000 handbags scrolled through tablets, their faces serene. Imani clutched her boarding pass like a talisman. The bold letters, Rostova Imani Seat 2A, were her shield. This was her first time flying alone, a cross-country trip from New York to Los Angeles, to spend 2 weeks with her grandmother. It was also her first time flying first class. Her mother Eva had insisted. "It's a non-rev perk, baby," she'd said, with a wink referring to the heavily discounted tickets available to airline employees and their families. "But for your first solo flight, I cashed in the miles. I want you to be comfortable. Just try to blend in." Blending in wasn't Imani's strong suit. Her vibrant, hand-painted denim jacket, covered in celestial patterns, stood out against the sea of navy and charcoal. Her box braids were adorned with small silver cuffs that chimed softly when she moved her head. She was an artist, and her appearance was her canvas. She pulled out her sketchbook and a charcoal pencil, the familiar weight, a comfort in this alien environment. She began to sketch the elegant curve of a winglet she could see through the panoramic window, losing herself in the lines and shading. The boarding call for Flight 715 to LAX finally came. Imani packed her sketchbook, took a deep breath, and joined the priority line. The gate agent scanned her ticket, smiled, and said, "Enjoy your flight, Ms. Rostova." The name, her mother's name, felt like a borrowed cloak of authority. Stepping onto the plane was like entering another world. The first-class cabin was spacious, with plush leather seats that looked more like futuristic pods. She found 2A, a window seat, and slid in. The seat was wider than her armchair at home. She stowed her satchel, ran her hand over the smooth leather, and gazed out at the bustling tarmac. This was real. As the rest of the cabin filled, Imani took out her sketchbook again, this time adding the details of the ground crew moving with practiced efficiency below. She was so engrossed, she didn't notice the flight attendant moving down the aisle until a shadow fell over her page. "Can I help you?" The voice was crisp with a saccharine edge that didn't quite mask its impatience. Imani looked up. The woman was in her late 40s, with a helmet of perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a name tag that read, Brenda. Her smile was a thin, tight line. "Oh no, I'm fine. Thank you," Imani said, offering a polite smile of her own. Brenda's eyes flickered from Imani's face to the boarding pass sticking out of her sketchbook. Then they scanned her denim jacket, her braids, and lingered for a moment on her worn-in Converse sneakers. It was a swift, dismissive appraisal that made Imani's skin prickle. "First class, huh?" Brenda said, her tone implying a question. "Are you sure this is your assigned seat? Economy boarding has just started." The implication was clear. You don't belong here. Imani felt a familiar heat rise in her chest, a mix of anger and embarrassment. This was the exact scenario her mother had prepped her for. Don't let anyone make you feel small, Imani. Your ticket is just as valid as theirs. Your presence is just as valid. She held up her boarding pass, making sure the name and seat number were clearly visible. Yes, I'm sure. Seat 2A. Brenda's thin smile tightened. She glanced at the ticket, unable to refute it. Well, she huffed, as if Imani's legitimate presence was a personal inconvenience. Just make sure your personal items are stowed correctly. We need to keep the aisles clear. She gestured vaguely at the satchel already tucked neatly under the seat in front of Imani, before turning and continuing down the aisle. Imani watched her go, the joy of the moment deflating like a punctured balloon. She was in her seat with her ticket, and she had already been challenged. She tried to return to her drawing, but the lines felt shaky. She could feel Brenda's disapproving gaze from the galley. The flight hadn't even left the ground, and she already felt like she was on trial. The cabin door was sealed with a heavy thud, and the pre-flight safety demonstration began. Mariah, a younger flight attendant with a kind, nervous energy, performed the motions with a gentle smile. Brenda, however, stood stiffly at the front, her arms crossed her eyes, sweeping over the passengers with the air of a warden inspecting inmates. Her gaze snagged on Imani for a second longer than anyone else. As the plane began its taxi, Brenda started the pre-departure service. She moved with an efficiency that bordered on aggression, her movements sharp and jerky. When she reached Imani's row, she took the order of the man in 2B, a businessman engrossed in his laptop. "And for you?" she asked Imani, not quite making eye contact. "Just some water, please." "No ice," Imani requested politely. Brenda returned a moment later with a glass. As she handed it over, her hand seemed to jolt, and a small splash of cold water arced over the rim, landing squarely on Imani's sketchbook. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Brenda snapped as if it were Imani's fault. "Clumsy," Imani gasped, pulling the sketchbook back. A dark circular stain was already spreading across the corner of her drawing of the winglet. "It's okay," she mumbled, grabbing a napkin to blot the page, her heart sinking. It was her favorite sketchbook. Brenda made no move to help, simply placing the glass firmly on the small coaster. "Try to be more careful," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, before moving on. The man in 2B glanced over, shot Imani a look of sympathy, and then buried his head back in his work, clearly wanting no part of the drama. Imani felt a knot of pure fury tighten in her stomach. It wasn't an accident. She knew it. It was a petty, deliberate act of malice. It was a way to put her in her place, to ruin something she cared about. She wanted to scream, to call the woman out, but her mother's voice echoed in her head. "Don't rise to the bait. Document, don't escalate. Stay calm." She took a shaky breath, closed the damp sketchbook, and stared out the window, watching the runway lights blur as the engines roared to life. The plane climbed to cruising altitude, and the seatbelt sign pinged off. For a while, there was peace. Imani put on her headphones, trying to lose herself in a podcast, but the sense of being watched never left. About an hour into the flight, the real confrontation began. A white couple, who had been among the last to board, got up from their seats in the premium economy cabin, just behind the first-class curtain. They approached Brenda in the galley, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Imani couldn't hear the words, but she could see the pantomime. The woman looked distressed. The man was gesturing emphatically. Brenda listened, her expression shifting from impatience to something that looked disturbingly like opportunity. She gave the couple a reassuring pat on the arm and then strode purposefully back into the first-class cabin. Her eyes locked directly onto Imani. She stopped right beside seat 2A. "Miss," she began, her voice now loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. "We have a bit of a situation. This couple has a medical issue, and they need to be seated closer to the front lavatory. They are also Premier status members who were incorrectly seated." Imani looked past her. The couple, a man and woman in their late 50s, stood awkwardly by the galley, looking uncomfortable. "I understand," Imani said slowly, "but this flight seems full." "It is," Brenda said smoothly, "which is why we need to make some adjustments. There is an empty seat in the main cabin, row 32. It's a window seat. I need you to gather your things and move there so we can accommodate these passengers." The entire request was a breach of protocol. A downgrade without so much as a discussion of compensation or options. It was a command, and the reason was a lie so thin it was transparent. The lavatory was at the very front, and moving the couple from row 12 to row 2 wouldn't make a significant difference. And if their status was the issue, it should have been handled at the gate. Imani's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The real test. "No," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it didn't tremble. "I'm sorry, but no. This is my assigned seat. I paid for this ticket." Brenda's plastic smile vanished. Her face hardened into a mask of cold fury. "Listen to me, young lady. This isn't a negotiation. I am the senior flight attendant on this aircraft, and my instructions are to be followed for the safety and order of this cabin. Now, are you going to move, or am I going to have you moved?" The threat hung in the air, thick and ugly. The businessman in 2B had taken off his headphones. Across the aisle, a woman lowered her magazine. People were watching. "I'm not being disorderly," Imani said, her voice gaining strength. "I am sitting in the seat I was assigned. You are asking me to move to a different cabin without reason. That's against policy." She knew this because her mum had drilled it into her. Brenda leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing or how you even got this ticket, but you are causing a problem. Frankly, some people are just more comfortable in the back of the plane. It's less pressure. Now be a good girl and move before this gets ugly." The coded language was gone. This was raw, undisguised racism. "People like you belong in the back." Imani felt dizzy with rage. Tears pricked at the back of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not cry. She would not give this woman the satisfaction. "I'm not moving," Imani stated, her voice now as cold as steel. "If you have a problem with my ticket, you can take it up with the captain." Brenda actually laughed, a short, barking sound. "Oh, I will. Believe me, the captain will hear all about the disruptive passenger in 2A. We can have the authorities meet you on the ground. How does that sound?" She straightened up, her face a smug mask. "Last chance." Imani simply shook her head, crossing her arms over her chest. She stared straight ahead, her jaw clenched. "Fine," Brenda spat. "Have it your way." She turned on her heel and began to march toward the front of the plane, toward the cockpit door, a triumphant smirk on her face. She was going to win. She was going to put this girl in her place. The cabin was dead silent. Every eye was on the unfolding drama. Imani's hands were shaking, but she sat tall. She had done what her mother told her to do. Now she could only wait for the consequences. Brenda raised a hand and knocked twice hard on the cockpit door. The sound of the two sharp knocks on the cockpit door seemed to echo in the pressurized silence of the cabin. Brenda stood with her back to the passenger's shoulders, squared, radiating an aura of righteous authority. She was about to report a non-compliant passenger, a standard procedure that would end with her being vindicated. She was in control. The lock on the door clicked audible in the hushed cabin. The door swung inward, not with the cautious crack of a pilot asking what the matter was, but with a smooth, deliberate motion. Out stepped the captain. The uniform itself was an immediate symbol of ultimate authority on an aircraft. The crisp white shirt, the black tie, the 4 gold stripes on the epaulets gleaming under the cabin lights. But it was the person wearing it that made every jaw in the vicinity drop. Captain Eva Rostova was a striking woman. Tall and poised, with a calm, commanding presence that seemed to take up all the air in the galley. Her hair was pulled back in a tight professional bun, and her eyes, dark and intelligent, missed nothing. She stepped fully out into the cabin, her first officer, David Smith, visible for a moment over her shoulder before he turned back to the controls. Brenda's triumphant expression faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. This was not the standard, grizzled, middle-aged white man she was used to dealing with. She had flown for Apex Air for 20 years and had never once had a black female captain on her flight. "Brenda." Captain Rostova's voice was even calm, but carried an undeniable weight. "I was informed we were having a cabin issue." "Report." Brenda immediately snapped back into her sycophantic employee mode. "Yes, Captain. Apologies for the disturbance. We have a passenger in 2A who is refusing to comply with crew instructions. She is being disruptive. I requested she move to accommodate a medical situation, and she has refused." Captain Rostova's gaze drifted past Brenda down the aisle. Her eyes swept over the nervous faces of the other passengers, over the awkward couple still lingering by the galley, and then they settled on the girl in seat 2A. For the first time, the captain's expression changed. The professional mask softened for a fraction of a second, replaced by a look of profound understanding and steely resolve. Her eyes met Imani's. In that single glance, a whole conversation passed between them. "I'm here. I've got this. Stay strong." Imani felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost made her weep. She simply nodded a tiny, almost imperceptible gesture. Captain Rostova then turned her full attention back to the flight attendant. Brenda, seeing the captain look towards Imani, misinterpreted the glance as corroboration of her complaint. "I told her it was a matter of cabin order," Brenda continued, pressing her advantage, "and that if she didn't comply, I would have to report her to you. She's been a problem since she boarded." "I see," the captain said, her voice dangerously quiet. She took a slow, deliberate step forward, moving out of the galley and into the aisle. She walked with a confident, unhurried gait, the way a person walks when they own the ground they walk on, or in this case, the aircraft. The passengers watched, mesmerized. It felt like a scene from a movie. She stopped right next to seat 2A, standing in the aisle between her daughter and the smirking flight attendant. She didn't look at Imani. She looked directly at Brenda. Her eyes were like chips of ice. "So let me be perfectly clear." Captain Rostova began, her voice low, but projecting to the first few rows. "You asked a ticketed paying passenger in first class to move to a seat in the back of the economy cabin. To accommodate a medical need, Captain," Brenda insisted, though a bead of sweat was now trickling down her temple. "And a status issue. A medical issue that requires them to be 10 rows closer to a lavatory they already have access to." The captain queried, her eyebrow arching. "And a status issue that wasn't handled by the gate agents. An issue you decided to solve by involuntarily downgrading another passenger. I was making a command decision for the good of the cabin. Brenda stammered, her confidence beginning to shred. No. The captain said the word, cutting through the air like a blade. You were not. You were harassing a passenger. You were discriminating against a minor. Brenda's face went white. I would never. Captain Eva Rostova then did something no one expected. She reached out and gently placed her hand on Imani's shoulder. The gesture was both protective and proprietary. She looked at Brenda, her eyes blazing with a fire that was no longer just professional, but deeply personal. Is there a problem with my daughter, Miss Jennings? The name Jennings hung in the air. The use of Brenda's last name was a formal, crushing blow. But it was the other word that detonated in the cabin. Daughter. A collective gasp went through the rows. The businessman in 2B's mouth was literally hanging open. The woman across the aisle brought a hand to her chest. Brenda's face crumbled. It cycled through a kaleidoscope of emotions in a matter of seconds. Utter disbelief, dawning horror. A sickening wave of panic, and finally the stark, abject terror of someone who has just realized they have not merely made a mistake, but have incinerated their entire career. She stared from the captain's 4 gold stripes to Imani's defiant face, and back again. The resemblance, which she had been too blinded by prejudice to see, was suddenly undeniable. The same determined set of the jaw, the same intelligent eyes. You were saying something. Captain Rostova pressed her voice, now pure, unadulterated ice, about having my daughter removed from this flight. The silence in the first-class cabin was absolute, broken only by the faint, distant hum of the engines. Brenda Jennings stood frozen, her face a pale, slack mask of shock. The word daughter seemed to be ricocheting around the inside of her skull, causing a system-wide failure. Captain Eva Rostova did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her authority was so total, her fury so controlled, that it was more terrifying than any shouting match could ever be. She squeezed Imani's shoulder gently one last time before straightening to her full height. First she addressed the situation Brenda had created. She turned to the anxious-looking couple from the premium economy. "So, ma'am," she said, her voice instantly shifting to one of professional courtesy, "I apologize for this disruption. Your assigned seats are in row 12. Is that correct? I'm going to have another crew member assist you with anything you might need." The couple, now realizing they had been used as pawns in a very dangerous game, nodded meekly. "Yes, Captain. We're fine. We're so sorry," the man stammered. "It's not your fault," Eva replied, giving them a curt nod that was both a dismissal and an absolution. She then caught the eye of the other flight attendant, Maria, who had been watching the entire exchange from the galley with wide, horrified eyes. "Maria," the captain ordered, "please see these passengers, then take over service for the first-class cabin. Brenda's duties are concluded." "Yes, Captain," Maria squeaked, practically running to help the couple, eager to escape the blast radius of Brenda's implosion. With the pretense of the problem dealt with, Eva turned her glacial attention back to Brenda. Her voice dropped low, meant only for the flight attendant, but the intensity of it was felt by everyone nearby. "Ms. Jennings, you and I are going to have a conversation. Not here. On the jet bridge. Now." It was not a request. It was the verbal equivalent of being grabbed by the collar and hauled away. Brenda's training, the last vestiges of her 20-year career, finally kicked in. She gave a jerky, robotic nod. Saying nothing, she turned and walked on unsteady legs toward the main cabin door. The walk of shame was excruciating. Every passenger she passed stared at her, their expressions ranging from pity to outright contempt. Eva followed a pace behind. Before she reached the door, she leaned down to Imani. "Are you okay?" she whispered. Imani, who was still processing the seismic shift of power, just nodded her eyes wide. "Yeah, I'm okay now." "Good. I'll be right back. Don't you move from this seat," Eva said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips before her face settled back into a grim mask. She disappeared through the curtains following Brenda. On the jet bridge, the air was cool and smelled of jet fuel. The ambient noise of the airport was a stark contrast to the sealed quiet of the plane. Eva pulled the cabin door almost closed, leaving it cracked just enough for privacy. She stood facing Brenda, her arms crossed. "Explain yourself," Eva commanded. The dam of Brenda's composure finally broke. The fear and humiliation curdled into a desperate defensive rage. That girl was being insolent. She had an attitude from the moment she boarded. I was just trying to maintain order. How was I supposed to know she was your daughter? You never said that. The excuse was so pathetic, so utterly self-incriminating that Eva was momentarily stunned into silence. "My daughter," Eva repeated, her voice dangerously soft. "Let me make something crystal clear to you, Brenda. It does not matter if she was my daughter or the daughter of the CEO or a young girl who saved up for a year to buy that ticket herself. She was a passenger on my aircraft, a child flying alone. And you targeted her. You belittled her, you lied to her, and you tried to use your uniform to intimidate and humiliate her in front of an entire cabin of people." "You were being a racist." Eva cut her off, the words sharp and final. "You saw a young black girl in a first-class seat, and your prejudiced mind couldn't compute it. You decided she didn't belong. You manufactured a problem to put her, as you so elegantly phrased it, in the back of the plane." Brenda flinched as her own ugly words were thrown back at her. "What you did," Eva continued, stepping closer, her presence utterly dominating the narrow space, "was not just a violation of Apex Air's code of conduct. It was a violation of federal aviation regulations that prohibit interfering with the duties of a crew member by creating a hostile and discriminatory environment. You, by your actions, compromised the safety and order of this cabin. You became a liability at 37,000 feet. You are unfit for duty." Brenda's face crumpled. Tears of self-pity streamed down her cheeks. "My career, 20 years, should have ended 19 years ago if this is how you treat people," Eva retorted, devoid of sympathy. She reached for the intercom phone on the wall of the jet bridge, pressing the button that connected directly to the gate agent. "This is Captain Rostova of Flight 75. I have a flight crew member, Brenda Jennings, who is unable to complete her duties. She will be deplaning. Have airport security meet her at the gate. I will file my full report upon landing in Los Angeles." Brenda let out a strangled sob. This was it. The point of no return. Being removed from a flight mid-journey prep was the ultimate humiliation. It was a career death sentence. "You can't do this," she whispered. Eva looked at her, her expression unreadable. "I already have. Now give me your crew ID." Numbly, Brenda unclipped the ID from her uniform and handed it over. The plastic card felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Eva took it without a word, turned her back on the weeping woman, and stepped back onto the aircraft, closing the door firmly behind her. She walked back to the cockpit, ignoring the stares of the passengers. The problem was neutralized. Now she had a plane to fly. The flight took off after a 10-minute delay, a fact Eva announced over the intercom with a crisp professional apology for an unforeseen crew change that was necessary to ensure the safety and comfort of all our passengers. The subtext was lost on no one in the first-class cabin. For the first hour of the flight, as the plane climbed over the heartland of America, Eva was all business. She and her first officer, David Smith, went through their checklists, communicated with air traffic control, and monitored the aircraft's systems with seamless professionalism. David, a sharp and perceptive pilot in his late 30s, had heard the commotion through the cockpit door. He hadn't said a word, but he had given Eva a look of quiet, unwavering support when she returned to fall to her seat. Once they reached a stable cruising altitude and the rhythm of the long-haul flight settled, Eva turned to him. "David, you have the con. I'm going to check on my daughter." "You got it, Captain. Take all the time you need," he said, his eyes kind. Eva unbuckled and walked back into the cabin. Maria was serving drinks, her movement still a little shaky, but her smile was genuine now. She gave Eva a grateful nod. The atmosphere in this cabin had transformed. The tension had evaporated, replaced by a quiet, respectful calm. The businessman in 2B was no longer hiding behind his laptop. He caught Eva's eye and gave her a thumbs up. Eva slid into the empty seat beside Imani, 2C. "Hey, baby," she said softly. Imani, who had been staring out the window at the endless carpet of clouds, turned to her. The adrenaline had worn off, and in its place was a fragile vulnerability. "Hey, Mom. How are you holding up for real?" Eva asked, her voice losing its captain's authority and gaining a mother's warmth. "It was awful," Imani admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I've had people say little things before. You know, stare too long, follow me in a store. But this was different. She hated me just for being there. She wanted to make me feel worthless." A single tear she had been holding back finally escaped and traced a path down her cheek. Eva reached out and wiped it away with her thumb. "I know. And I am so sorry that happened to you. I wanted this to be a special trip for you, and that woman poisoned it." "You didn't poison it, Mom. You fixed it," Imani said, a watery smile touching her lips. "I've never seen anything like that. You were like a superhero." Eva chuckled a low, tired sound. "Not a superhero. Just a mum who has had to learn to be very, very clear about where the lines are." She sighed, leaning her head back against the seat. "I wish I could tell you it gets easier, Imani. But it doesn't always. I've been in this industry for 22 years. I've been a captain for 8. Do you have any idea how many times I've walked into a pre-flight briefing and had a male co-pilot ask me to get him a coffee, assuming I was a flight attendant?" Imani's eyes widened. "Really?" "More times than I can count," Eva said grimly. "I've had my credentials questioned, my decisions second-guessed, my authority undermined in subtle, insidious ways by men who couldn't stand seeing a black woman in the left seat. I learned a long time ago that I can't afford to be just good. I have to be flawless. I can't afford to get angry. I have to be calm, cold, and twice as prepared as anyone else in the room. What did you see today? That was years of practice, baby. Years of swallowing my anger until I could use it as fuel." It was a side of her mother Imani had never seen so clearly. She had always known her mom was strong, her trailblazer, but she hadn't understood the daily grinding cost of it. "That woman, Brenda," Eva continued, her gaze distant. "She's a relic. She comes from an era where the cockpit was for white men, and the cabin was for women who looked and acted a certain way. People like her, they feel like something has been stolen from them. They see you a smart, confident young black woman, sitting in a first-class seat you absolutely deserve to be in, and it breaks their brain. They can't handle it, so they lash out. As they were talking, the man from seat 2B, who had been discreetly listening, leaned over. He was an older gentleman with a kind face. "Excuse me, Captain Rostova," he said quietly. "I don't mean to intrude. My name is Arthur Thompson. I'm a partner at a law firm in Century City. I witnessed everything that the flight attendant did from the moment she questioned your daughter's ticket to the vile things she said. It was an appalling abuse of power." He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a business card. "I've already written down a summary of what I saw and heard. If you or the airline need a formal witness statement, you have my full cooperation. What you did was not just good parenting. It was exceptional leadership." Eva took the card, genuinely touched. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. That means a great deal." "Please," he said with a small smile. "Call me Art." The small gesture was a powerful reminder that for every Brenda in the world, there were good people who would stand up for what was right. It was a crack of light in a dark experience. Eva turned back to Imani, tucking the card safely in her pocket. "See, you were not alone in this." She stayed with Imani for another 20 minutes, just talking, mother and daughter suspended in a metal tube 7 miles above the earth. They talked about her grandmother, about Imani's art, about the future. By the time Eva returned to the cockpit, the weight had lifted from Imani's shoulders. She felt seen, defended, and loved. She took out her sketchbook, turned to a fresh page, and began to draw. She sketched a woman in a pilot's uniform, her face calm and strong, with 4 golden stripes on her shoulder, shining like a constellation. The moment Flight 715 landed at LAX, the gears of corporate and legal machinery began to turn with terrifying speed. Before Eva had even completed her post-flight checks, she had dictated a detailed 2-page incident report to the Apex Air West Coast Operations Manager, referencing a formal complaint to follow. She was calm, factual, and devastatingly precise. The airline's legal department, upon hearing the words racial discrimination, unlawful downgrade attempt, and harassment of a minor, went on red alert. This wasn't a simple customer service complaint. This was a multi-million-dollar lawsuit waiting to happen, piloted by a credible, high-ranking employee who was also the victim's mother. It was a PR nightmare of the highest order. Brenda Jennings was met at the gate in JFK not just by security, but by a human resources manager who informed her she was being placed on immediate unpaid administrative leave pending a full investigation. Her wings were for all intents and purposes clipped. The investigation was swift and brutal. First, there was Captain Eva Rostova's report. It was a masterclass in professional documentation, detailing every microaggression, every condescending remark, and the final overtly racist demand. Second, there was the statement from Arthur Thompson. The lawyer from 2B emailed a meticulously detailed 3-page affidavit that corroborated every single point of Eva's report. As a legal professional, his testimony was ironclad. Third, and perhaps most damningly for Brenda, was the statement from Maria. The junior flight attendant, now free from Brenda's intimidating presence, tearfully recounted not only the events of Flight 715, but also a history of Brenda's behavior. She spoke of Brenda's habit of referring to black passengers as them, of her complaining about the changing demographics of first class, and of her tendency to enforce rules with far more zeal on passengers of color. Maria's statement painted a clear picture. This was not an isolated incident. It was a pattern of behavior. The airline pulled Brenda's file. It was littered with minor passenger complaints over the years, many with similar undertones, all of them previously dismissed by middle managers as personality conflicts. Brenda's defense crumbled. She hired a lawyer and tried to frame herself as the victim, a dedicated 20-year employee being sacrificed because she inadvertently disciplined the daughter of a powerful pilot. She claimed Eva used her captain's authority to settle a personal grudge. It didn't work. The airline's lawyers presented her with the evidence, multiple corroborating eyewitnesses, and a documented history. They also had something else. In the age of social media, nothing happens in a vacuum. A passenger in row 3 had discreetly filmed the moment Captain Rostova walked out of the cockpit and confronted Brenda. The video was only 45 seconds long. The audio wasn't perfect, but the visuals were undeniable. The powerful, calm black captain. The stunned, pale flight attendant. The silent, watching cabin. The video was leaked to a popular travel blogger. Within 48 hours, it had gone viral. Captain Mom and Nasht racist flight. Attendant trended on Twitter. News outlets picked up the story. Apex Air was hemorrhaging goodwill. Their stock took a small but noticeable dip. The airline acted decisively. 2 weeks after the flight, Brenda Jennings was terminated for gross misconduct, violation of company policy, and breach of federal aviation regulations. But the karma didn't stop there. Her name, now public, was toxic. No other major airline would touch her. Her FAA flight attendant certification was put under review due to the safety implications of her actions. She was ostracized by former colleagues who were either disgusted by her behavior or terrified of being associated with her. Her carefully constructed life, built on a foundation of seniority and petty tyranny, had been demolished in a single flight. Eva and Imani, with the pro bono guidance of Arthur Thompson, decided against a personal lawsuit. Instead, they leveraged their position to demand institutional change. They entered into negotiations with Apex Air. They didn't want a payout. They wanted a promise. The result was the Rostova Initiative. Apex Air, as part of the formal settlement, and a massive PR push to repair its image, agreed to implement a new mandatory training program for all 20,000 of its employees, from the baggage handlers to the CEO. It was an intensive scenario-based course on implicit bias, de-escalation, and cultural competency, designed by leading experts and overseen by a new diversity and inclusion board. And the final crushing blow of karma for Brenda Jennings. The public face of the initiative, the person tasked with leading the training for new pilot and flight attendant classes, was the newly promoted training captain, Eva Rostova. Brenda's legacy at the airline she gave her life to was to become the cautionary tale used to teach everyone else not to be like her. Her act of hatred had inadvertently planted the seeds of the very change she so bitterly resisted. 6 months later, the view from 30,000 feet had changed. Not from the window where the sky was still a vast, brilliant blue, but from within the culture of Apex Air. The Rostova Initiative was in full swing, and the ripples were being felt throughout the company. Conversations about bias and respect, once whispered or ignored, were now happening in briefing rooms and training centers. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Captain Eva Rostova stood before a class of new flight attendant recruits. Her uniform was as crisp as ever, but today she wore it with a different kind of authority, not just of command, but of mentorship. She spoke about safety service and responsibility. And then she told them a story, a sanitized but clear version of what happened on Flight 715. "Your uniform gives you authority," she told the room of eager young faces. "But authority without empathy is just tyranny. Your job is to make every single person who steps onto your aircraft feel safe and respected, regardless of what they look like, where they come from, or what seat they're in. That is your primary duty. Everything else is secondary." The recruits listened, their expressions rapt. The cautionary tale was now part of the company's DNA. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, Imani stood in a small, bright art gallery. It was her first student exhibition. People milled about, looking at paintings and sculptures from local young artists. In a prime position on the wall was Imani's piece. It was a large, mixed media canvas. In the center was a charcoal and graphite portrait of her mother, not smiling, but looking forward with a calm, powerful determination. The background was a collage of words and images, snippets of the FAA regulations, the chemical formula for jet fuel star charts, and the bold letters from her boarding pass, Seat 2A. The title of the piece was The Captain's Daughter. Her grandmother stood beside her, beaming with pride. Imani had poured all the hurt, fear, anger, and ultimate pride of that day onto the canvas. It was a testament not to the ugly thing that had happened, but to the beautiful strength that had defeated it. A man she didn't know, Arthur Thompson, had come to the opening. He bought the painting. "I was there on the flight," he told her with a warm smile. "And I want this to hang in the lobby of my law firm. I want every young lawyer who walks through our doors to see it and be reminded of what integrity and courage look like." Later that evening, Imani's phone buzzed. It was a text from her mum, who was on a layover in London. It was a selfie of Eva with her new flight crew. It was one of the most diverse crews Imani had ever seen, men and women of all different ages and ethnicities, all smiling. The text underneath read, "The sky is big enough for everyone. So proud of you, my brilliant artist. Love, Mum." Imani smiled, a deep, genuine smile of peace and confidence. Brenda Jennings had tried to tell her she didn't belong in first class, but her mother had shown her the truth. She belonged in the sky. She could own her space, take her seat, and if she had to, she could learn to fly. The world was full of turbulence, but for the first time in a long time, the path ahead felt like nothing but a clear, open sky. 1 year later, the name Rostova carried a different kind of weight within the aviation industry. It was no longer just the name of a highly competent captain. It was the name of a movement. Captain Eva Rostova stood at a podium in a cavernous conference hall in Chicago, the keynote speaker at the annual Women in Aviation International Conference. The 4 gold stripes on her shoulders seemed to gleam a little brighter under the stage lights. She wasn't just representing Apex Air anymore. She was representing a paradigm shift. Her speech wasn't about the ugly incident that had sparked the change. She never once mentioned Brenda Jennings by name. Instead, she spoke about the altitude of attitude, the idea that the culture within an aircraft cabin is as critical to safety as its mechanical integrity. She spoke of empathy as a non-negotiable instrument on the flight deck and in the aisle, and of respect as the fuel that allows a crew and its passengers to navigate any turbulence. When she finished, the hall filled with pilots, engineers, executives, and aspiring aviators erupted in a standing ovation. She was no longer just a captain. She was a leader, an icon of the quiet, unyielding professionalism that had turned a moment of personal crisis into a legacy of progress. Thousands of miles away, in a sun-drenched studio at the Rhode Island School of Design, Imani Rostova worked on a new sculpture. She was a freshman, having earned a scholarship based on a portfolio that had been anchored by her celebrated piece, The Captain's Daughter. The painting had done more than win an award. It had given her a voice. It had taught her that art was not just about creating beauty, but about transmuting pain into power. She was no longer the nervous girl who felt like an imposter in a first-class lounge. She moved with an artist's confidence, her hands sure as they shaped the clay, her vision clear. The incident on Flight 715 was no longer a raw wound. It was a scar, a part of her story that had shaped her, hardened her, but no longer defined her. After the conference in Chicago, Eva's flight back to JFK was delayed by a rolling thunderstorm. Stranded at O'Hare for a few hours, she decided to grab a coffee and a sandwich. The terminal was a chaotic river of humanity, a cross-section of the very world she had vowed to make a little safer and more respectful. She found a less crowded food court and got in line at a generic cafe, selling overpriced pastries and coffee. She placed her order with the young man at the register and then stepped to the side to wait at the pickup counter. As she waited, she glanced at the woman working the espresso machine. The woman's movements were listless and mechanical. Her hair, a brittle, dull blonde, was pulled back in a loose, greasy ponytail. Her uniform, a cheap polyester polo shirt with the cafe's logo, was stained with a bit of chocolate syrup. There was a profound weariness in her slumped shoulders, a permanent scowl etched onto her face. Then the woman turned to place a finished latte on the counter, and her eyes met Eva's. It was Brenda Jennings. The recognition was instant and mutual. For a half-second, the world seemed to stop. The noise of the terminal, the frantic boarding calls, the rolling suitcases, it all faded away. Brenda's face, sallow under the fluorescent lights, went through a rapid series of micro-expressions. Confusion, disbelief, a flash of pure, venomous hatred, and then a deep, crushing shame. She looked older than Eva remembered, beaten down by life. The sneering superiority she once wore like a shield, now completely gone, replaced by the brittle anger of a victim of her own making. Eva felt nothing. Not anger. Not a triumphant surge of satisfaction. Not even pity. It was the detached observation of a pilot assessing a neutralized threat. This woman held no more power. She was just a ghost from a previous flight plan. Brenda was the one who broke the silence. Her voice was a hoarse, bitter whisper. Well, well, Captain Rostova, here to gloat. Eva didn't rise to the bait. She simply met Brenda's gaze, her expression calm and unreadable. I'm just waiting for my coffee, Brenda. The use of her first name, so devoid of any emotion, seemed to wound Brenda more than any insult could. You ruined my life, she hissed, her hands trembling as she gripped the stainless steel counter. 20 years. I gave them 20 years and you took it all away. Eva took a slow breath. The old Eva, the one from years ago, would have burned with a righteous fury. The mother in her wanted to list all the ways Brenda had tried to ruin her daughter's spirit. But the captain, the leader, the woman she had become, knew that this battle was long over. You made your own choices that day. Brenda, Eva said, her voice even and low. You chose your actions, and you chose your words. I just flew the plane. Just then the barista called out Eva's order. She picked up her coffee and sandwich. She looked at Brenda one last time, at the miserable, self-pitying rage in her eyes, and realized the truest karma wasn't just the loss of a job, but the inability to ever understand why it was lost. Brenda would spend the rest of her life trapped in the wreckage of her own prejudice, forever blaming the world for a crash she alone had caused. I hope you find some peace, Eva said the words genuine in their finality. She turned and walked away without looking back, merging into the anonymous, forward-moving crowd, leaving Brenda to fume in the lingering smell of burnt coffee. Thank you for listening to this story of injustice, strength, and ultimate vindication. The story of Imani and Captain Eva Rostova is a powerful reminder that prejudice often withers in the face of unshakable authority and truth. One woman's bitterness created a storm, but a mother's strength and a daughter's courage charted a course right through it, changing an entire corporate culture in the process. This is the kind of karma that doesn't just punish the wicked, it builds a better world in its wake. If this story moved you, if you believe in standing up to injustice and celebrating the heroes who do, please take a moment to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear a story of empowerment, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more true-life stories of drama, karma, and justice. Your support helps us continue to find and share these incredible tales. Click subscribe, and we'll see you in the next story.